Welcome to our live webinar, From Customer Journey Mapping to Journey Orchestration, revealing customers' real journeys and nudging them towards their goals. Like I said, my name is Anthony. I'm joined by Trent. Trent, you want to say hi?
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great to have you on the session. Looking forward to sharing the work that we're doing in the customer journey space. Just recently, actually got some feedback from a client, some amazing results that we're seeing in terms of our ability to influence outcomes. I think a lot of today is going to be the discussion of how we get that, but I think the key thing to take away as you're thinking through and examining what we're doing is the dramatic impact. We're pretty confident in most scenarios that we can double the conversion rate of any particular scenario.
Great, thanks Trent. So a little bit of housekeeping. How this is going to work is I'm going to present a little bit and take you through some journey analytics versus journey mapping. I'll then be asking you guys to participate in a poll and get your responses on a few things. Trent will then be taking us through a solution demo. And then we're going to have a Q&A at the end as well. So you'll notice in your little webinar application that there's a bit there that says chat. If you want to submit any questions during the course of this, then please feel free, and we'll obviously do our best to address as many of those as we can towards the end. And yeah, so please do that. Oh yes, an important point is that we've obviously promised you some complimentary papers. So please hang in there. I'll tell you exactly how to grab those in a moment. And obviously after this also we're going to be getting the slideware and the recording through to all of you, so you're going to have access to everything that happened today. Right, so let's get into it. We've got a fair amount to cover today. What are execs thinking about? What's keeping execs awake at night? So obviously it's a lot of things, and we just want to mention a couple of them, not all of them, but just a couple of them. So here's a few. Rising cost of acquisition is the first one, especially in the online space and with digital startups. We're finding that acquisition for businesses is becoming more and more costly because customers have more and more options. Related to that, switching costs and lapses. It's just so much easier for customers to actually switch and to change what it is that they're doing. They can do it all online these days. The growing distance between business and client. So touch matters, but it's dwindling. You just need to think of your favorite healthcare provider or some other ecosystem service where there is now increasing complexity with regards to the product and service range, as well as just maintaining who you are as a customer and having that single view of a customer. Exploding data. Chances are you have all the data you need in your business in order to pull out the views and the visualizations and the insights that you need. But really, as you know, the trick is telling a story, so extracting the signal out of the noise. And then displaying a return on CX initiatives. As CX professionals, many of you will know that there's always the fine line between satisfying internal stakeholders and satisfying our customers. And we need to be able to illustrate the return on our CX initiatives. Now, many of these challenges would go away if we were able to boost acquisition, retention, and cross-selling, and many of them actually obstruct acquisition, retention, and cross-selling. So in terms of our approach to meeting the challenge, and you're going to see this slide a few times today, and we're just going to deal with different aspects of it. So in terms of our approach to meeting the challenge, let's look at the first three circles on this slide. Helping the customers achieve their desired outcomes. That drives revenue, we believe. Delighted customers are more correlated with excellent customer journeys than perfect touch points. We tend to fixate on the call center or the website or the mobile app, when actually what we should be looking at is the movement of customers from one touch point to the next and their longitudinal journeys as they do that. And then the third one being empathy, which is achieved by listening to and understanding customers across their entire journey, not just at a single touch point. So how can acquisition, retention, and cross-selling be ensured along the customer journey? This is a stylized picture of a customer journey. It represents, it doesn't represent anything right now. It's going to represent a card application process from left to right. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this canvas to illustrate how perhaps we can check off, and these are just suggestions, how we can check off acquisition, retention, and cross-selling as a customer moves through the different phases of a card application process. So they would have applied for their card, and then moving towards activation, but something happens that they actually don't activate and they stall. So what we do is we reach out to the customer, in this case across a mobile channel. We say, do you need some help? The customer replies with, yes, please, need some help. We process that through text analytics. We generate a case internally. We assign that to someone within an SLA period, and someone actually reaches out to Charlotte, in this case, and solves her problem for her, and she's able to progress. At this point, and that note's more for myself than anything else, please hang in there because we've actually got a card application case study coming up with one of our customers, and you can see exactly how we were able to nudge customers in the right direction. Right, so we move beyond activation, and now the customer wants to administer. She's actually applying for a credit limit increase, but she's frustrated because it's taking too long. She takes to social media. She says, you know, this is really frustrating. We process that. We're able to respond to her on the channel that she used. And in exactly the same way, what we do is we create a case which we then assign to someone within the business, and someone is able to reach out to her, take it offline, reach out to her and solve the problem for her and help her forward. The next thing that happens is the card application process is finalized, and we are now in a position to ask her about her experience. How was your experience? She happens to give us an 8 out of 10, which sounds fantastic to me. And we associate that information, that feedback, with her profile. So we're learning more and more about Charlotte as we go. And now we've actually learned so much about Charlotte because there have been quite a few interactions, and we've collected all that information around her profile within the platform. We're actually able to make her an offer that is compelling and meaningful and relevant to her. Not just a everyone gets one offer, but we understand her, we understand more about her, and we're able to offer her something, and we're able to do that. So here is the cross-sell or the upsell scenario in this particular case. She makes a purchase, and like I said earlier on, while this has all been going on, while the customer has been moving through this experience and other experiences, we've been collecting a lot of information around her, collecting it around this thing that we call the single view of the customer. And it's not a conceptual thing, it's actually something that's within the platform. And we have this full view of the customer's activity, and I'll show you a bit more about that soon. So now let's just fall onto the fourth point on this particular slide, which is what I've illustrated, that customer centricity is a cultural challenge, and interventions at key journey points help customers to achieve their goals. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help customers forward to achieve their goals. So let's take a breath there for a second. I just want to introduce you to us for a minute, if you don't know who we are. Our head office is in Johannesburg, South Africa. We have offices in Australia as well as North America. Here is a quick view of our client list at the moment. I believe it's updated. You can see we play quite hard in financial services and insurance, but we also have clients in telcos and ICT, hospitality and lifestyle, as well as retail at the top there. In terms of our software and services stack, we're talking quite a lot today about journey analytics, top left, but the supporting parts of our software stack include Incuba Engage, Incuba Social Media, Incuba CX, as well as Incuba Case Management. In terms of our services, we've got consultative services such as TribeX, as well as managed services and journey mapping. Some of our more significant implementations would include the likes of Edcon, Telkom, Kalula, Suncorp. Suncorp is a large bank in Australia, and as you can see, they are supporting 9 million customer relationships. Sorry, I just got a message that the deck stalled there for a moment. I think we're all back online. Sorry, it may be a connection issue on our side. And finally, happily, we've been recently acknowledged by Forrester as well as Gartner in some of their reports, especially in the realm of journey analytics and voice of the customer. And more recently, this was November last year, in the Gartner Market Guide for Voice of the Customer Solutions report, we were very pleased to be one of only 2 CX solution providers globally to receive highest level ratings for reporting and analytics, customer journeys, and professional services. So that would be 3 of those categories. All right, we're back in it. Customer journey maps versus real customer journeys, and this is very much in line with what you would have seen as the title of this particular webinar. We're all familiar with customer journey maps. They look something like this. Traditionally, they would have a series of experiences. in the customer experience. In here, we're looking at discover, sign up, activation. Within each of those experiences, we have sub-experiences. There would be an indication of touch points. So in other words, the channels at which those can happen. And this is really a conceptual view, a view that the business has internally of what their customers experience. There's typically the view that the customer starts on the left and moves through towards the right until they have achieved everything they want to achieve. But we all know that although these things live on our boardroom walls, this is not what customers really experience at all. So I'm just going to take a moment to explain how it could be different. Here's an application experience once again. The application moves from application to accepting the quote, to documentation, to activation. And there are a series of touch points or channels at which any one of those could actually happen. We might even have a sense of a modeled customer journey. So we really think that our customers are going to follow the path of going from the web and to email and then to the web. And we actually want this to happen because it's efficient and there are cost savings and so on and so on. But does this really happen in the real world? Has anyone applied for a card anytime recently? You'll know that it's different. So it might look something like this. Charlotte starts in the branch. She gets distracted and gets onto the website. She progresses to the website, but then has to call the call center about something that is confusing, who bounces them to the branch. The branch bounces them back to the call center. Ultimately, she gets her documents, which is thrilling until she looks at them and she realizes they're wrong. She tweets about it. She calls the call center again. The call center makes everything right, but not right enough for her to actually progress. You'll notice that she hasn't actually reached activation. She's not using her credit card. So this is actually a failed customer journey. However, in here, there is a lot of insight. And what we really want to do is we want to extract every possible customer journey. And at an aggregate level, we're able to draw pictures which show longitudinal views of what the customers are doing from left to right, where they are getting stuck, where they are going away, where they are ending up in recursive loops. And this visualization or this discovery is really only the first point, because once you've got the discovery, what you want to do is you want to be able to drop in and proactively help and fix situations that need fixing, whether that is through service recovery or communications or nudges or information or educational aspects, or even through cross-selling and upselling as someone becomes as someone actually qualifies for a particular offer. So that's where we want to go. We want to nudge people towards an outcome. Let's look at the final 2 points on this slide, which is our approach to meeting the challenge. In order to get a full view of the customer's individual journey integration, I'm just reading bottom left now, a diverse data type is required. And we'll get onto that in a moment, because I'm sure there's a question in your mind of where's all this data coming from. And bottom right, large client bases need to leverage big data and machine learning and digital interactions to empathize at scale. How is this all achieved? Customer journey management is in fact the next evolution of customer experience. But we obviously also need to display that there's an ROI associated with customer journey management. Fortunately, that work has been done. I want to draw upon a report that was published by the Aberdeen Group at this stage. Aberdeen Group is a research agency. They researched, in this particular case, over 200 B2B businesses. And what they did was they extracted those who had formalized customer journey management programs, and they compared those to the companies that didn't. These are some of the high-level numbers that popped out. 14 times the customer win-back rates at those with journey management compared to the other companies. 3 times the revenue from referrals compared to other companies. And in terms of annual improvement in return on marketing investment, ROMI, it is 54% greater. In other words, 25 versus 16 at the companies that have formalized customer journey management practices and methodologies compared to those who don't. So that is the ROI. Those are just 3 of the metrics. There are other metrics, including proportion of positive social media mentions and so on and so on. They're all available in the report, which is freely available, and we can help you to find that report if you need some help with that. So what are the journey steps in terms of customer journey management? Well, don't take our word for it. Let's see what Forrester says. Forrester says that the 4 journey steps are journey design and planning, which is really about a repository of journey maps. Data fusion, which is taking all the appropriate data that's required, including feedback, and really pulling it into one place so that you can visualize what's happening. Journey and testing optimization, which is about journey changes and testing journey changes and interventions, journey automation and orchestration. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just dive into each one of these very briefly and illustrate how some of our approaches support these journey steps as you move into them. So journey design and planning, a repository of conceptual journey maps and who's going where. So within our product, what we do is we actually we do configure the customer journey from a conceptual viewpoint. We call it the SEM model. As you can see, it is a hierarchical, a layered model of experiences, sub-experiences, and touch points. And what we do is we associate, or we anchor at each one of those the things that we actually want to test through surveys, for instance, overall satisfaction. The other thing that we do is we anchor text analytics queries to these particular nodes. So when open-ended feedback comes in either through social media or something like open-ended questions, we process that through text analytics, and we anchor that to the appropriate areas of the customer journey so that we can see where the hotspots are in the business. We obviously have a range of analytics which are available, right from high-level analytics, what you're seeing there on the left-hand side, which is things like NPS and CSAT, across to operational reports, as you're seeing on the right-hand side there, which are either distributed via our platform or in a static format via email. Data fusion, connecting data sources and creating a unified view of the customer. So these are your line of business systems within your business and your application. So it's your favorite CRM, it's your point of sale, it is all your data repositories and data lakes. And what we do is, rather than saying we want to replace all of these, we say let's rather layer a journey analytics solution on top of existing data sources. What we do is we plug it in through integration, through our own integration layers, and we read the information that is appropriate and relevant to what it is that we are trying to achieve. And what comes out of that is, because we're able to match customers at different points, so we would know that someone on social media is also this person who walked into the branch, who is also this person who happened to be on our website, we're able to produce these longitudinal views of what customers are doing as they are moving towards their goals and progressing towards the outcome that they are trying to achieve. So that is a very simplistic view of the how. In terms of what kind of data we actually use, let me just open these all up. Starting on the left, we've got your transactional and external systems, and this is what I referred to previously in terms of some of your business systems. We also use quantitative feedback, typically in the form of surveys and structured feedback. We have qualitative feedback, which we pull in, which would be social media, as well as verbatim responses within your surveys. And then we even support the notion of Expire Transactions, and what that means is something that actually hasn't happened yet. So if a customer has been in a stalled state for a week and hasn't done anything, we can actually use that as a trigger to reach out to the customer and perhaps offer them some help or some education or something like that. Like I said earlier on, the single view of the customer is not a notional thing. It is something that lives within our platform. Here is a view of Charlotte. We can see all her personal particulars that we've collected over time, and we can even see, although you can't see it in this particular view, we can get a sense of her interactions, the touch points that she has touched, what her sentiment is, what the themes are that are important to her. So in other words, what are the topics that she's talking about most often? And this really empowers the people at the front line before they pick up the phone and reach out and try and resolve a particular issue to Charlotte, who may already have a pre-existing issue that hasn't been resolved yet. Journey testing, this is number 3, testing interventions and measuring results. This is basically a product shot on our side, and this is another view of that, where what we've done is we've done a comparison. So we're saying something like, show me the promoters versus the detractors. Are they going in different directions? When I'm talking promotion detraction, I'm obviously talking from an NPS perspective, but we can also segment and profile regionally or based on an answer to some question. Are certain people getting stuck where other people are not? And another thing that we can do is that once we have actually created or exposed, extracted a segment of people, we can actually turn them into an audience. And we can say, this particular group of people, or people that meet these criteria in future, let's reach out to them with the following communication, or let's nudge them in the following way whenever they meet this point. That way you are addressing things almost before they have happened. And finally, our fourth step, which is journey automation and orchestration. And this is really about the automation of interactions, being predictive, and using some machine learning in reaching out to customers. There is journey analytics on the left-hand side. That is a product shot on our side. And what I'm going to do now is just display how something that I said earlier on, that the rest of our modules and solutions really do support journey management and journey analytics in the following way. So here might be an example of people who followed a particular path. They've now qualified for an offer, and we have a graphical user interface within Incuba Engage that allows us to configure very rich personalized mailers and make sure that certain subsets of people receive them, and they're always very contextual and very relevant based on what people are experiencing right now. Here is a view of case management, which I've also spoken about. So this is service recovery, SLA-based service recovery. The service recovery can be based upon rules. So in other words, people who have the following kind of feedback, whether it be negative or according to certain themes, we can make sure that that is elevated to the importance of an open case, that it's assigned to an area in the business, and that area in the business has a period of time in which to actually resolve that. There are obviously reports there as well to show which cases are escalating, which ones are taking a long time, which teams are really resolving these things quickly, and so on. Here is our social media listening tool. So Incuba Social Media, we're able to pull in mentions of your brand, perhaps even mentions of your competitors, if that's what you want. And we're able to reply from this dashboard, from this interface. And there's also an indication in the analytics of themes, sentiment, all those type of things, in order to see who is saying what and on what channels. We support the major social media channels there. I've spoken a little bit about CX, but this is really our voice of the customer solution. This is what we've been doing for a long time. This is where we're able to build surveys, get the feedback back from customers, pull it into online dashboards, and ensure that all the right people in the business are receiving the information that they need, whether it's operational or high level. And finally, I did mention already the voice of the customer. Sorry, not the voice of the customer, the single view of the customer. And here is another view of Charlotte's profile within our particular application. I promised you a case study. Here it is. We have done some work for one of the large banks, FNB in this case. They were having particular challenges with regards to customers who were applying for credit cards, but then not moving through to activation, which sounds strange, but it's a common problem at the banks. These were the customer experiences: customer applying for a credit card, accepting a quote, receiving a card, and activating. And within each one of these, there are particular states. So there may be an incomplete application, there may be an application fulfilled, but customers end up in a particular state. What we did is we, wanting to nudge customers towards that trophy that you see there on the right-hand side, we basically started by collecting a lot of information. So those who had been successful, those who had been unsuccessful, we got information from them on what was working, what wasn't, where the frustrations were, and we were able to basically identify stall points. So these were the stall points where we realized people needed some help. What we then did, and this slide does get a little bit busy, we started implementing engagements, educational engagements at the various points of the customer journey, all basically informed by and empowered by machine learning, so that offers and educational information were all offered up to the customers in order to nudge them to the next point. So this may look like, do you need some extra information on this particular case? Do you need to talk to someone about this particular thing? And ultimately, the goal was to nudge people, being informed by machine learning at every point, and the output always being very contextual engagements, nudging them to the right the whole time in order to get them to activation. So did any of this actually work? Well, here are a couple numbers. There was a 108% increase in card activation, and there was a 98% increase in initial spend. We obviously are still working with the bank, and we've got some exciting things in the future. So we're excited that both these numbers and other numbers are going to look even better in the future. So how do we actually do all of this at scale? Because it's easy to focus on Charlotte, the one customer who happens to be stuck, but we've got 1 million customers, right? So we're confident that our key differentiators, and these really are key differentiators as a CX player, as a customer experience player, are what would be required in order to do this. And we've spoken already about a lot of these things: big data fusion, dynamic journeys, sentiment measures, so that speaks to text analytics, customer memory. We have a joke internally that we know what you did last summer. We remember everything that the customers do and everything that they tell us, and we keep that around their profiles so that we don't forget. We can use that to inform all the communications going forward. Closed loop service recovery, engagement communications, that would be the Engage solution, machine learning, and ultimately everything we've built has an intuitive graphical user interface so that people like yourselves, with just a little bit of training, can actually build your own communications, build your own surveys, monitor your own customer journeys, and so on. So I'm almost at the end of what I have to say. Imagine you had the capability across millions of clients to see who's on and off their journeys and who's cheering for you. Wouldn't this be a game changer? Well, that is why we're here. It is at this stage, and just before I hand over to Trent, and Trent, I will unmute you just before I hand over, I am just going to launch the poll quickly, and I'm going to keep the poll live for just a minute or so. And if you could please take a moment to complete the poll. The question is one of basically how formalized in your business is the area of customer journey management? How seriously is your business taking it? Are the discussions significantly advanced? What I can tell you is that 14% of you have said nothing at this point in time. 38% have said planning and discussion. 48% have said some basic approaches. And nobody has said fully implemented and operationalized. It is at this stage that I am going to hand over to Trent. Trent, I'm going to unmute you in a second.
Thanks very much, Anthony, for the introduction. Appreciate it. Quite interesting that we saw on the poll that that very few people are actually at the point where they're actually doing this on a whole-scale basis. And I think to a large extent, that's really what I'm going to be talking about from my point of view. So I'd actually like to show you how we do this and show you how the technology works. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and taking you into our journey management solution. So this is actually the Incuba platform. And straight off the bat, what I'm able to show you over here is kind of the endpoint of where we land up. And I'm going to continue to talk about the journey management example that Anthony started. So what you're actually seeing here is you're seeing a representation of a customer journey of a credit card. Now, an important thing about this particular visualization is that this visualization is produced from data. On the left-hand side, you see people that have come in on the credit card application. And if I actually go to the first node over here, I can see that 1,679 people have actually started the application process. And then what we see is you start to see a little bit of the breakdown. So we can see approvals is 1,266, declines is 413. We can go through to the people that we've actually sent an offer to and have actually approved that. And then as we progress along the journey, we can see that we sent out some communications to close to 700 people, 681 to be specific. We can see exactly who clicked on those links and ultimately who spent. So what the Incuba platform does is it allows us to come up with a visualization of the customer journey map. And this actually gets you to that point of being able to truly implement a solution in a very operational way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we get to this visualization. So give me a little bit of time. I'm just going to kind of unwind a couple of few points and just talk a little bit about some of the mechanisms, because I think they're quite important. And I've just shown you that particular visualization, but what sits behind that visualization is this ability to actually, first of all, source transactions from external systems. So you remember Anthony mentioned that we're using external systems. This might be, for instance, a workflow system, could be your line of business system, and it would have information such as the credit card application. Now, in a large organization and any enterprise in this day and age, it's very unlikely you've got a single system. So you're actually going to be pulling this data from multiple line of business systems. Might be your administration systems, might be your call center systems, it might be your website. And one of the key capabilities of the Incuba platform is this ability to ingest data. That's the data fusion element that Anthony spoke about. And then on top of that, what we want to do is, it's not good enough to just simply have a view of the transactional data. We actually want to get quantitative feedback, so that is coming from the surveys. Again, Anthony mentioned that. Qualitative feedback, anything in a written format, such as social media or email. And then the last kind of information we want to actually bring into this equation is our expired transactions. So some of you might ask, why would we want to do that? And it actually turns out that from a systems point of view, you can't deal with nothing. So that's a silly statement. Obviously, you can't deal with nothing. But sometimes nothing is really important. In fact, specifically when a customer has done nothing, you actually want to have a representation of that in the data. And that's where our elapsed transaction comes into play. So what we do is we set a timer and we actually monitor if a customer has done nothing subsequent to a particular transaction, and that in itself could be a particular trigger. So let's go back into the platform, and I'll start showing you a little bit of what's sitting behind all of this. So let's go over here, and what we're going to do is we need to actually go through the process of a mapping process. So as Anthony mentioned, you've got a line of business systems, and let's just say you've got a transaction that we want to call in our customer journey map credit card approval. This has actually obviously been pre-set up, but I just want to show you the form of this. Now, against that, we've got a couple of pieces of information that are really vital. So we want to know who it is. So obviously those numbers that I ran through are a whole lot of different individuals. We need to know when that took place. So that's a date and a time. We need an ID, just so we have a unique identifier, and then potentially a type. In this particular case, the type, for argument's sake, is that it's approval. So what we do is we create a placeholder within the Incuba platform to be able to ingest data from an external system. And then what we've developed is, because we kind of realized that a lot of people working on these solutions are not necessarily incredibly technical, we don't want this to be a technical challenge. We need to then associate your external data that's coming from your line of business system. So in this case, it's coming in as a text file. We can take in the data in many different formats. And then what we can do is we can actually link to that. So I'm sure you've all, at some point in your careers, used Microsoft Excel and you've imported data. Well, we've actually developed something very similar. This is our integration kit, which is kind of like an Excel wizard on steroids. We can bring in the data, and then what we can do is we can get the data that exists in your external system, and we can actually map it into the Incuba system from multiple systems. So what we can do is we can then look at that, and in fact what we can do is we can start to create additional transformations in the system to actually start manipulating the data. And you can actually start to actually change all of this data. So we can do groupings and derive columns and row filters. So it gives us a high level of granularity. And ultimately what we then do is we map that to the placeholders that we created in the system. So that really deals with this first aspect over here, which is how we bring in the external data. So onto the more qualitative elements of the equation, and I go back into the Incuba platform. And what we actually are able to do is we can go into our media channels, because that's the way we refer to data that we get from external systems. And what we can do is we can use information from these different systems to actually map elements such as tweets or surveys. So over here, for instance, we've got a VOC, or voice of the customer item, and we've got a decline reason. So let's, for instance, take the decline reason. We're just going to go and edit that. So that would be information that we've collected from a text analytics query. And what we can do is we can actually link that to our customer journey, and we can call that the decline reason. So we can actually go and look for an instance of a decline and the description thereof, which is then brought into the customer journey. And that allows us to then start to link together both the transactional information as well as the structured quantitative feedback and then unstructured information. I mentioned obviously that we are able to do expired transactions. So if I go back to the expired transactions, you might see that some of these have got little timers associated with it. So over here, what we can do is we can set a timer against that transaction, and what that does in the system is obviously sets a timer. So if we have an eventuality that nothing happens, we then create a new transaction, which we in turn display within our visualization. So that's how we get to actually build up all of the data that becomes our representation of the customer journey. So hopefully that's a good start and pretty useful in getting to understand what's happening from a customer point of view. But at this point, we haven't necessarily got to the point where we have something that is massively useful. Now, any of you that have come from a more traditional voice of the customer program would be familiar with the concept of Net Promoter Score, and you'd also be familiar with the idea of detractors and promoters. Detractors being individuals that have given ratings that indicate that they would not endorse the brand. So be more specific, they wouldn't recommend it to family and friends. And then promoters, people are saying your brand is fantastic, I love it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually run a quick analysis based on this particular scenario, and I'm going to do that via a compare. So let's go into the detractors, let's go into the promoters, and we're going to go back in time to actually look at the data set. Now, what's happening in the background is every one of these transactions is associated with a particular individual, and that individual, we've got a view of them over a period of time, and we might over that period of time have collected a survey that would give us insight as to whether they are in fact a promoter or a detractor. And what I'm doing through this particular analysis is I'm linking to that particular view. So I'm taking every one of the little instances at one of these nodes, and obviously we now have a subset of data because not everybody would have given feedback. And we're going to run a quick analysis to look at the difference between the promoters, which are indicated in orange, versus the detractors, which are indicated in gray. And again, it's the same visualization that we had earlier. The key difference being here is that we can now see the difference between these two scenarios, and because the flows are slightly different, we get a slightly different visualization. But the crux is that we're looking at people that have gone from application to approval, and then we're interested in the accepting scenario versus the decline scenario. So when we start to look at this a little bit more detail, we can see we've actually got a kind of even split in terms of people that were approached. But what comes out of the credit card approval is we've got a disproportionate number of people that actually go on to accept the offer. They are obviously then sent a promotion. They click on that promotion, and those individuals then subsequently spend money. So all of that can be deduced by the high proportion of promoters that are following the path, our desired path over here towards spend. Similarly, we've got a branch over here at the top, and we've got a much higher proportion of people that are declining the offer. So what we can see is that even though there are some promoters, very small number, in this case 9, by far the majority, 28, are declining the offer. Further, using our approach of looking at reason codes, we can see that they're declining for interest rates, for fees and effort. And then what we're doing is we're in fact taking those people, we're sending them a revised offer, and it's not really helping because we're not really seeing that a significant number. In fact, there's a very, very small number of people that are actually coming back and are spending money. So really what it says is if you've got a customer that's not an advocate of the brand, your ability to convert with them is obviously significantly reduced. That gives you another level of granularity in actually understanding the customer journey. So let's reset the analysis and go back to looking at all of the data that we have within the system. And the next part of the process of what I want to do is, it's great to be able to look at this, it's great to be able to do the analysis, but ultimately what we want to do is we actually want to apply rules to these different scenarios. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to select a customer path, and we can actually do that obviously through the platform itself. So if I go into the mode of selecting the path, I can go into the application, I can go into the approval, and what we start to do is start to build up a rule set on the left hand side over here. Now what I can do is I can take that particular rule and I can create a target audience filter. So the way our platform works is it supports two concepts, and Anthony touched on these earlier on. We can either nudge people if they meet certain conditions, or alternatively what we can do is we can have somebody engage with them, somebody in our organization or in our broader network. We do that through, in our world, we do that through cases. So we direct a query into an individual who's then alerted, makes an outbound phone call. Or alternatively, what we can do is we can create a communication, and that's exactly what I'm doing over here. If I go to create a new rule and create sort of credit card application, and what I can specify is I can specify that this particular rule would either be for the current selection of customers, or it could be for anyone that follows this particular path in future for a period of time. So what I've actually done is obviously gone through the trouble of presetting this up, and I'm going to go into an engagement that now has used that particular rule. So if we go into our engagements, and again within the Incuba platform, what we're able to do is actually construct the particular communications that potentially would be useful in this particular scenario. So let's go into the engagement. What we're going to do is we're going to set up an engagement that's specifically positioned to driving a different additional spend. So what you'll see over here in terms of the rule that's been applied for this particular target audience is the journey path rule, and the specific rule, just highlighting it over here, is for credit card application through to credit card approval, and then credit card accepting the offer. And we're doing that for the last 180 days. What I can do is I can always add a additional rule to this. So for argument's sake, I can have use, for instance, a contact, and I can look at an attribute of the contact, and the attribute, for argument's sake, could be let's use age as an example, and we can say that the age, for argument's sake, is greater than let's say 30 years old for argument's sake. So very, very flexible in the ability to actually add rules and use rules that are a combination of the journey together with rules that are associated with the entity themselves. The next part of the process that you want to go through is you actually want to construct the communication. And within the platform, we can obviously send off emails, we can send SMSs. These are fully integrated into the platform. I'm going to go with an email example. Again, we have Transatlantic that's providing the service. It says dear first name, so we're going to do some personalization. Then it has a couple of options, and it has a dialogue link. That dialogue link is going to actually ask questions of the particular individual when they are sent a particular communication. The next part of the process is then to take that scenario, and what we're able to do, and it's a very simple process, is we can start to personalize this communication, which we've pre-done. But what I'm going to do is just to show you how easy it is to do this. I'm going to break the link, and it's a simple case of a drag and drop. So we take the attributes that have been passed through the transaction that I set up much earlier, and we personalize the communication. We can preview that, and ultimately we can schedule when that communication happens. We are able to put that into an active or an inactive mode, which is very useful, particularly for the testing of those particular communications. Now, one of the things that's quite important in this whole equation in setting up these particular communications is we want to have a very strong view on the actual customer themselves. And as Anthony mentioned, one of the key components of our solution is that we have this single view of customer. I just want to give you a quick sense of what that looks like from a platform perspective. So let's go into all of our contacts. I'm going to look for a particular contact that I think is of interest. So we're going to go and look at Malcolm. Malcolm is one of the contacts in our CX repository. And we can go and look at all of what's happening in Malcolm's world. So you can see all of the information that's been passed through the events that have fed into the system. We have in the system, we actually have a capability to link together these different contacts and the representation of them. So if different personas are represented by this one individual, we can link them together. And then we've got a whole lot of different information. I'm going to actually start with the text analytics that represents this individual. Now, one of the interesting concepts that we support is this ability to profile a customer. And we can actually start to describe a customer not only in terms of their hard data attributes, but also in terms of their soft attributes. So here within what we call the customer node, we can see that this customer has been tagged as intent to leave. Now, intent to leave is a tag that is established against this particular customer. And you saw earlier on when I was setting up rules, I can use that as a tag. And that tag arose, this intent to leave, because of the particular words that Malcolm used, and they were, think of canceling my account, too expensive. So our text analytics capability then is associated with the individual. It gets tagged against that individual, and that tag in turn can be used by the rules engine to determine different communications to be sent off. That information that we imported is, these are the transactions that apply. So yeah, we can see, for instance, that we've had different applications through different channels, and all of this information, this is a representation of an individual. So obviously the customer journey path for an individual is obviously always a straight line. And we can see all of that information that would in fact feed through to the visualization that I showed a little bit earlier. And similarly, any interaction that we have with the customer is then pulled together in terms of communication. So in this case, we've sent out some communications to Net Promoter Score. We sent out some credit card offers. In fact, we've created a case as well because there's been an escalation with unhappiness. And every one of these elements is also represented in the customer journey. We do, and this is not directly related to the customer journey perspective, but we do have the ability to actually then have chats using our case management capability with the particular individual through the system. So if I go back to where we started from a slide point of view, I'm just going to kind of reiterate some of the things that I've shown you from a platform point of view before we actually wrap up. So we started off and I showed you how we ran an analysis and we could understand the different paths that customers went through. I showed you how we applied rules, specifically our target audience rules. I showed you how we could use rules to trigger off communications and the complexity of those rules and the comprehensiveness of those rules. I showed you how we can send out communications as part of the customer journey. Just to emphasize that the communications that we send out are not just broadcasts, they are in fact dialogues, and we have a very rich capability to dialogue and then use those responses. We also have the ability to interface into social media, and I showed you the linking of how we did that within the rules capability. And we can actually service those customers through social media, and then how to incorporate surveys into a customer journey mapping process, and then how we built up the single view. One of the elements that I didn't show you, but I do want to make mention of, is that we do have a capability to publish within the platform retail vouchers. So Some of you might be familiar with a third-party provider, the Y Group. They are interfaced into a wide variety of different retailers, and we can embed within our communications these particular incentives, which then obviously adds to the success that is achievable over time. That pretty much wraps up what I wanted to show you within the time that we've got available. And I'm going to hand you back to Anthony just to finish off, and also to take any questions that you might have. And obviously, with the limited time that we've got left, we'd be happy to answer those questions.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Trent. I'm just taking back the screen. I'm hoping that everyone can see my PowerPoint slide once again. And I just want to move into, before we head into Q&A, I want to tell you about the papers. So we did mention in the communication, as well as I mentioned it earlier on the webinar, that these Journey Orchestration Industry Series papers are available. If you look at your little webinar gadget that you use that you're using to basically listen through at the moment, there's a little section there that says handouts, and there are 2 handouts in there at the moment. You can actually download these papers directly from this. We've got another couple of papers that are going to be added to this series, and you guys will be updated on that as soon as new industry series papers are made available. And obviously, if you have some trouble with this particular little webinar application in order to get these papers, then please let us know, and we'll make sure that you get them very quickly. Okay, let's just move into Q&A. Thank you to those of you who have submitted questions. I see we've only got 4 or 5 minutes left, so we're only going to pick up a couple here. But yeah, Trent, I don't know if you want to maybe have a go at some of these questions. Here's a question from David. There are a number of customer journey maps in the business, so that's presumably their business, representing various customer experiences. Are these customer journey maps no longer valid?
So one of the things that we do in preparation of establishing a customer journey implementation is we actually start off with a customer journey masterclass. Now, I did show how we use data to do journey maps, and one of the practical things is we need to have at least a hypothesis of what a journey looks like. The data then proves whether the hypothesis is real or not, and therefore the work that you've done around customer journey maps is a vital input to this process. We're of the view that that is a vital input. Obviously, we'll give you a more real-time view and a more realistic view of what's happening in the business. So no, it's not a waste at all. However, we see it's a necessary and yet incomplete view of customer journeys.
Great. Here's another question. Thank you, Lisa, for this one. We have several applications and data lakes within the business. I suspect that the data we need is spread across all of them. Does this create some complexity?
Yes, it does. It certainly does create complexity. Having said that, what we've done, and that's the reason we put all the effort we did into the integration kit, is we've made access to that all those different data sources obviously a lot more effective by having a visual data management tool. So the complexity is there, and I don't think we can wish the complexity away. What we've done is we've provided a series of tools that makes managing that complexity hopefully a lot more effective.
Okay, that's great. Let's do a final one. Taryn, thank you for this question. We're collecting customer feedback through surveys and social media listening, and we're ensuring that this feedback is sent to the correct departments for actioning. We feel that this is sufficient in terms of a view of the customer, but based on this webinar, it sounds like we need more than that.
I think, I mean, as I say, in much the same way that the first question really covered the fact that journey maps are useful input, what you've just described now in terms of voice of the customer feedback is a useful input. One of the things we support, and I maybe didn't emphasize it, is we do support the ability to ingest, in other words, bring into our platform all of that information. And again, I position that it is a necessary but incomplete view of the customer experience. What we want to be doing is we're combining that information with transactional information, and it's a combination of both that will get us to the point of being able to manage the journey from an end-to-end point, as I've shown through the demonstrations.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Trent. We're going to stop there. I want to thank everyone who has joined us here today. Please feel free, you may want to screen grab this. Please feel free to reach out to us at any point if there's anything that you think we can assist you with further. But it's been a whole lot of fun, and thank you for joining us. Trent, any final words from your side?
I'm very encouraged. We were pleasantly surprised by the number of people that attended today. Really appreciate the time. I think one of the things I want to emphasize is there's obviously a transition point between what we've done today and getting going, and that is the Incuba Masterclass. So we run a Masterclass Pro, which very often is a great way to actually get your execs and your subject matter experts involved. That is a 4-hour session where we would run through some of the concepts we've done today. We actually do a very practical exercise, and that actually gives rise to a business case and our ROI model. And you can do a masterclass. It's not technology specific, it's not Incuba specific, but it's certainly very useful as an input to any work you might do in the journey space.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day further.